Thank you.
10%, that's the offer that Numsa accepted. But there was a 10% on the table, which was tapering down in year 2 and 3. Why did it take Numsa so long to make this decision?
Well, Numsa had to consult its members. I mean, I think in most strikes, or in many strikes, people look at what's happening and they say, look, they look very near why they're fighting. I think the reality is obviously both sides. You know, if it was simply a question of a few rand, then the employers would settle and we would move up. I think if you actually tot it up over the year and you spread it over the workforce, it's quite a significant amount of money. So, you know, when they're arguing about 1 or 2 percentage points, it looks quite small, but it's actually quite important to the employers and the workers.
Numsa call it a victory, but others said, you know, they asked for 15% and now they came down to 10, not a victory as such.
Look, obviously we have a style of bargaining in this country. It's very interesting, where unions ask for a lot more than they'll end up getting. In any negotiation, neither side ever lands up getting what it asks for. But I think in our bargaining here, the gap between what people ask for and what people are willing to settle is pretty high. In fact, this strike was quite mild compared to a lot of others. I've seen strikes where the employers have been offering 6%, the workers have been demanding 40%, they then settle on 8%. So that's what bargaining's about. Bargaining's a compromise. You never get everything you want in a bargain.
Now, you did say that, and it's true, that they have to consult their members, but was it more the members stalling the rank and file, or was it the leadership? Not at all.
No, I think it is the membership. I think people always make the mistake of believing, you know, you can't, in a well-organized union, you can't organize a strike without the members. And people have tried this before. You know, people talk about intimidation and they talk about bullying. They're usually talking about, you know, are 10 people going to bully 200,000 people? It doesn't work like that. And generally, if the members don't want to go on strike, you won't go on strike. If the members don't want to go back to work, you won't go back to work. Obviously, what the union leadership tell their members matters, because union member leadership very often recommends or doesn't recommend. But at the end of the day, unless the workers want to go back to work, you can't.
Some suggest that it could have been a political statement from Numsa. What do you think?
I think it was influenced by the political environment. I mean, we're in an environment at the moment where there's a lot of pressure on unions, there's competition between unions, and that may well have influenced what Numsa did. But, you know, I think it's always very important to bear in mind, you know, that it takes two to make a fight. And you can't have a conflict unless both sides are deadlocked. And if you look right now, you know, a lot of people focus on Numsa. After last night's settlement, the real issue at the moment is not a fight between the union and the employers. The real issue now is the fight between two employer associations. And NAYASA, the National Employment Association of Employers, doesn't want to settle. So, you know, I think that if people are concerned about strikes, and our strike figures are not that high by international standards, but if you're concerned about strikes, then we must look at the way in which both sides react to the other side, not just the one side.
But what does this do to our economy? I mean, if you look at it, the employers were reportedly losing about 300 million rands a day during the strike, and of course, if we look back at the AMCO strike, even more. So, talk to us about through the impact of this strike on the economy.
Obviously, a strike it doesn't help an economy. Obviously, there are costs to a strike. But I've been saying for a long time, you know, these estimates of how much the strikes cost us are really thumbsucks. Among other things, what they don't take into account is that what will be happening in the metal industry over the next couple of months is that workers will be working into a certain amount what they lost during this period. And yes, there is a cost to that because the employers have to pay overtime, but it's not nearly the cost that we're told. So I think the correct answer is to say, yes, it does cost the economy, but this idea that it's a massive drain on the economy only happens in very exceptional circumstances. And I think people have also got to ask, what would be the cost of not having a free bargaining system? I think if we didn't have a free bargaining system, the kind of conflict that we'd have in factories would be far worse than now.
Now, as a country, what do we need to do? You did indicate that our strike numbers are not that high, but what do we do as a country to arrest this trend, to ensure that minimal disruption of the economy and the economic output of the country?
Look, there are some people who say our labour law is the problem. I don't think there's anything wrong with our labour law. I think that's what is wrong is that we haven't fixed the problems of the past. We still have a massive poverty problem. We still have a massive inequality problem. And what is happening is that that's pushing in on the workplace, because many of these workers who've been on strike, their pay packets get distributed among unemployed and needy relatives to a certain extent. So what that's telling us is we need to fix the poverty and inequality problem. And the only way we can fix that problem is by serious negotiation at the national level between employers, labour and government.
There was also the issue of a rejected clause in the proposal that would prohibit unions from debating employment issues with individual businesses. Do they have a point, really, Numsa, in rejecting that particular clause?
Well, in the end, they settled on a compromise, and I think the compromise was a reasonable compromise. Mm-hmm. The issue was, can you raise issues in between negotiations at company level? Mm-hmm. Numsa was saying, look, we can't say that we won't do that, because what happens if there's a retrenchment or a dismissal? We must be able to contest that. The employers were saying, we're not going to sit here negotiating wages and then have you raise wage demands later on. The compromise they've come to is that they will not raise wages, but it means that people can raise these day-to-day issues, and I think that that's a sensible compromise.
Another issue was labour brokers that was on the table that they raised with the employer. Do you think that this is a political issue? Shouldn't they have raised that with government rather instead?
Well, they have been raising it with government. Their argument is that there's no law which says you have to use labour brokers. So it's perfectly acceptable for a union to go to the employers and say, look, we don't think you should use labour brokers. It then becomes an issue of whether the employers think that that's sensible or not, and how importantly the issue is for employers. So yes, it's perfectly legitimate to raise that. The question of national legislation is, should we have a law banning labour brokers? If we don't have a law banning labour brokers, you can still not use them.
Over the next 3 years, do you see relative calm in the industry?
Look, I think we must I think we can be quietly optimistic. Yes, it's not guaranteed, but despite the fact that we've had a 4-week strike, this is a very organised industry. I think the most destabilising issue for the industry at the moment is this problem of the new employer association. CIFSA, the employer association, have been bargaining for years. Numsa have been bargaining for years. They know the rules of the game. They know how it's played. If you have a new player who's saying we don't accept the rules, that is a very difficult situation. So if it's left to CIFSA and Numsa, then I think we've got a reasonable chance of stability for the next 3 years. If NESA has its way through the courts, then I think we could have a difficult time in the metal industries.
So we could see there's violence within the industry because of...
Yeah, because you see, what NESA is saying is our members will not accept the deal which was made between CIFSA and Numsa. If that prevails, if the courts agree, then you can't have the centralised bargaining you've had in the past where Numsa and CIFSA make the deal. You're then going to have hundreds of deals all over the place. And if you have hundreds of deals all over the place, the chance of something going wrong is very high.
Now, Prof, looking at our major trading partners like Europe, Asia, and even within Africa and the BRICS countries even, and what perception does our labour unrest in this country generate about South Africa as an investment destination?
Well, you see, I think we always use this issue of foreign investors and how do foreign investors feel. I speak to a lot of foreign investors. I speak to a lot of local business people. I think that in the main, foreign investors take their cue from local business people, which is sensible. You want to know whether to invest in a place, you speak to the local business people. So it's really a question of how our local business people feel about this. If local business people tell foreigners that we're a country hit by masses of strikes and the whole thing's gone out of control and we're living in anarchy, foreigners will stay away. If they say, look, we could do better on this issue, but it's basically a stable system, which a lot of the time it is, then I don't see any reason why foreigners won't take their cue from that.
Professor Friedman, thank you so much for joining us here on AM News. That was political analyst Professor Stephen Friedman talking to us about the Numsa strike, which ended yesterday, and some of the positives that came out of that.